Please help me welcome David Fixler.
Thank you, everyone. Hello, Knoxville. Great to be here. Well, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to get out given the thunderstorms and flight delays. But anyway, one quick correction to just one little thing that Paul said. The work I did on the Saarinen buildings at MIT was also with EYP. That actually is the most recent project I've done. But that's a minor thing. I just wanted to set the record straight. So, modern transformations. What do we do with the vast and seemingly almost endless and endlessly problematic legacy of modernism and its progeny? So really we're talking about architecture here that begins back in the 1920s, but comes right up to the very recent past. Some people debate, are we still modernists? Are we something else? I don't really know. It doesn't really matter. But the fact is, there's an awful lot of building out there that has to be dealt with, and we have to find sensible ways to do it. So I want to start with the beginning in terms of the, and this goes back to the early days of modernism, but also to the early days of modernist preservation. And I love the Bernard Tschumi quote on the left there, because it talks about the fact that when something starts to fall into ruin and its use in a way is compromised and may have even been forgotten, what's left is the pure architecture. What's left is that moment. And it's not to say it's the only thing we should value, but it reminds us of the power of these things as an artifact, as an object. And I also like to show this because, in fact, in 1959, Le Corbusier brought the sorry state of the Villa Savoie to the attention of the French government and said, you have to save my buildings. And thus was actually born modern movement preservation by Le Corbusier, who, of course, 30, 40 years earlier than that was saying, we have to move beyond history, we can't worry about these things, we just have to move forward. It's always different when it's your stuff that's getting damaged. Then I also show this other work of Le Corbusier's, the Unité d'Habitation at Marseille, because this, in a way, is the beginning of, if you like, the regulatory government apparatus getting involved with conservation. Because André Malraux, who was the Minister of Culture of France in the 1960s, in 1964 said, we need to declare this building a monument. At that point, it was 12 years old. So never mind the 50-year rule or buildings that have to be 100 years old or anything. Here was a building that is 12 years old that was already being declared eligible for listing as an historic landmark and treated as a historic property. And in the same way here in our country, Dulles Airport by Eero Saarinen outside of Washington, completed in the early 1960s. By the late 1970s, the National Park Service had declared that eligible for reasons of extraordinary significance to have that listed as well. So preservation is catching up to us, as Rem Koolhaas famously says in Chrono Chaos. And I think there really is some truth to that we're having to look at younger and younger properties and be sensitive to the fact that we can't necessarily wait 50 years for something to be declared significant. So just a brief refresher on modernism and modernity. The modern movement really was all about a new social order, celebrating the new technologies, and celebrating that in a way that was aesthetically different from what had come before it. So you have society, technology, and aesthetics. And I said one example of each here. This is J.J.P. Oud's Kiefolk housing estate in Rotterdam. And I like to show this because it is not only a strong example of the kind of workers' housing that was built in the post-World War I era that really triggered and jump-started the modern movement in a very big way, but it's also, from a preservation standpoint, this is a simulacrum. This is actually not the Kiefolk housing estate. It is a rebuilding of it, because the first one was built of experimental materials and to space standards that nobody would live in today. So in the end, the Dutch government said the only way we could possibly save this is to take it all down and rebuild it. Now, this, needless to say, caused a significant controversy. Of the preservation purists certainly said, you can't do that, this is not preservation, it's falsifying history. But on the other hand, it's wonderful to walk around this neighborhood and experience this. And I think that I often say there is no black, there is no white, there is no right, there is no wrong in preservation. It's all varying shades of gray in the middle, and you pick your optimal shade. You find the right balance between what makes sense from a socioeconomic and historic and cultural standpoint, and you just say, this is the best we can do. You're never going to please everybody, but so be it. Technology, also in Rotterdam. An early example of a glass curtain wall building. This is the vanilla factory. And it is completed in 1931. And I like to show this one because this has become, it's become an example of adaptive reuse. They've actually built a new building within the building, and it's very emblematic of the changing economic times that went along with this as well, because this was a building that was built, that was conceived in the 1920s as a place for the transshipment of bulk goods, coffee, tobacco, sugar, that sort of thing. Now it's a technology incubator. So there's design firms, artists, small tech startups, that sort of thing populating this. So it's very much emblematic of the new economy at the same time. And then finally, aesthetics, I need to say nothing about Mies van der Rohe's Barcelona Pavilion, but I think it's safe to say that this really let the world know that modern architecture could also be beautiful. It's a new standard of beauty. It is an unornamented, sleek, asymmetrical, dynamic kind of beauty, but it is beautiful. And also, again, the side story with this, of course, is it was a temporary pavilion. It was taken down in the early 1930s. Spanish government in the 1980s decided to rebuild it. So again, you have here really a simulacrum of the original, although what I understand is it's already starting to have its own conservation issues, and this is causing some consternation as to how one designates a building like this, which is, in fact, a reconstruction. So I'm going to look briefly at the sort of the conservation charters and whatnot that govern the way in which we treat modern properties around the world and the way we treat historic properties in general. I'm not going to go into this in any depth, but I just wanted to remind you all of the different ones. And the ones that are up there in orange are the ones that particularly apply to modern properties. The Eindhoven statement, which is the founding statement of Docomomo. The ICOMOS Madrid document, which is something that they started in the ICOMOS Special Committee for the 20th Century started in 2011. They're still working on it. And then something that I've been working on for a couple of years, the APT Principles for the Renewal of Modernism, which if we have time at the end, I'm going to take you through very briefly. But it's basically that this is something that tries to get around the very, very large corpus of modern buildings that aren't necessarily that significant, that you wouldn't normally think of as being in the domain of historic preservation, but yet need to be treated sensitively. So you say you need to find what is the optimal amount of care that needs to be done to preserve this building, to take care of it from a sustainability standpoint, so you're not having to tear it down and rebuild it. But at the same time, acknowledging some essence in its DNA of what you want to preserve and what you want to sustain as you're moving that idea forward. And conservation starts with conservation management planning. And I'm going to show you a couple of examples. This is the Paimio Sanatorium by Alvar Aalto, one of my favorite buildings of all time in Finland. And they have done an exemplary conservation management plan, which basically is a little bit like a historic structures report, which many of you may be familiar with, except that it takes a more activist role in saying to people, this is what you need to do with this building now. Right? And when you do decide to make certain decisions, these are the protocols you need to do to vet the decisions to make sure that they are in harmony with the building. Remembering, of course, that there is no such thing as pure restoration, and none of these buildings are in stasis. They're all going to change. Everything is going to change. And the idea in doing this is to manage the change in the best way possible. I was fortunate enough to be involved last spring with the early efforts on this building, another Alvar Aalto building. Both this and Paimio, by the way, have sort of been decommissioned. They are buildings seeking a use, seeking a purpose, because the purpose for which they were built no longer exists. So there's actually a group now of students at Harvard who are working on possible ideas for this. But this is part of a sort of a many-pronged international effort to take this building, which is a World Heritage Quality building, and to try to find ways for its adaptive reuse. But nothing's easy. Even a building like this, and even in a country as sympathetic to architectural heritage, especially modern heritage, as Finland is, it's still proving to be very difficult. So we all have to be vigilant and creative in thinking of ways to make these buildings sustain. The Getty Conservation Institute has instituted this Keeping It Modern program, which is now in its 5th year, about to go into its 5th year, and they do grants for to do conservation management plans for modern buildings. I worked on this one. This is the Paul Rudolph's Jewett Art Center at Wellesley College, a very early Rudolph building. I think one of the most sensitive, delicate buildings he ever did. I don't think anyone would argue about the delicate part. But it was a great exercise, and it really looks very holistically, because you're not just looking at the architecture, you're not just looking at the architect, you're looking at the history of the institution, the way it's used, what makes sense economically, all of these things. There's a large series of values. This is values-based conservation, and values gets into anything you can think of that has to do with addressing meaning in the built environment. And it extends now, it's starting to extend even to commercial properties. This is the Sask Power Building in Regina, Saskatchewan, that I had to do a very quick conservation management plan for. Typically these CMPs take a long time, like years, but this I had to do in 4 months because they were under pressure to get some work done. But kudos to the local authorities in Regina said, wait a minute, this is a historic building, this is a significant building. You haven't got a plan in place for how to do this. So we very quickly sketched out a framework from which now a new design can emerge to make changes to the building, to sensitive changes to the building entry, to the facades, to the roof, in a way that is in harmony with what this building was trying to be. And I think I like to show this as an example of where this has been very successful. The Barbican, which is an enormous modern complex in London. Some of you may know it houses, I think, between 30 and 40,000 people, and it's got an entertainment center. It's got all kinds of things. It's a real sort of city within the city. And they, some years ago, started developing a series of design guidelines, which everyone has to use, and they are not as restrictive as one might think. I mean, the whole idea of this, and the guy who did it, John Allen, is particularly sensitive to this, that you can't just tell people you can't do things. You've got to tell them, here's your opportunity to do X, Y, or Z, not you are restricted from doing X, Y, or Z. And it makes all the difference in the world to sort of cast it in those terms and to cast it in that mindset, so you're allowing people, you're enabling people to do this well. So, many of you are probably engaged in working with historic buildings. Some of you may even already be working with modern buildings. Is it different? And if it's different, why? I mean, I think there are, as with all of these things, there are multiple answers to these questions. But certainly, the big things, of course, are the idea of material versus idea. In so many modern buildings, when the buildings wear out, rather than the material gaining a patina, which you can sort of scrub up a little bit and restore the way you can with stone, or even with good quality aged wood or copper, it's hard with many of the modern materials especially if they're part of systems, to be able to do that in a way that makes any kind of sense economically or from a sustainability standpoint. And so this notion has come up, well, maybe we're preserving the idea of what the building is, even if we're replacing the material. And there's a lot of validity to that, but there's also a lot of debate, and it's something where, again, you have to be sort of constantly vigilant in analyzing that. The rest of them, I think, are fairly evident, but the last couple, the newness value, the idea that many modern buildings, that you think of a Richard Meier building, they really, if they don't look new, they don't look right. They are not meant to age gracefully necessarily. And then when you are intervening in this building, the fact that many of us are still designing as modernists, this sort of the proximity in time and design language can create ambiguities. And so the question is, what kind of an approach do you take? It's not like with a traditional building whereas the Park Service says you put a modern addition on a traditional building. This is a little bit more, it's a little bit more nuanced. It's just not as obvious. So where does this start in earnest? Where it starts in earnest is really with the founding of Docomomo in the late 1980s, and over the controversy surrounding this building, which is Jan Dijker's Zonnestraal Sanatorium. And the whole complex looked like the photo in the upper left at the time that Docomomo first started looking at this. And now what you see after this literally over 25 years of sort of working on this is a beautifully restored central pavilion, but immediately the question is raised, is it restored? No, it's rebuilt. That is, aside from the concrete framework of that building, everything in there had to be replaced. So this is, again, it's in the same location, and it is not even serving the same use because nobody has tuberculosis anymore. But it is still a community building, and it's a beautiful example of someone who has gone to great pains, Vessel de Jong in this case is the architect, to bring this building back, but with certain sustainability sacrifices. It's still single glazed windows. There's still very little insulation in the walls. They did the best they could. But so the idea that an iconic building like this certainly deserves this kind of treatment, but if you start to broadcast this out to a large scale, it becomes a little bit untenable economically, given the situation we're in with energy conservation, this sort of thing. And it's a constant balancing act that one has to do with these buildings, and that's why it gets a little fuzzy around the edges as to what is allowed and what's not. Another example of a building that of Alvar Aalto's that actually, and most of Aalto's work actually does age much better than most modern buildings. This is an early one, and it's had its problems. This, of course, the Viipuri Library was taken by the Russians in 1939 in the Winter War, and they kind of let it go. The ceiling that you see there in the upper left photo had completely disappeared. So here again, through a very concerted international effort, money has been raised to rebuild this, and then this photo here you see the beautiful completed product. But again, it's the recreation of something that had disappeared. And to a lot of preservation purists, that's a head scratcher. It's a little bit of a problem. So it's again, it's not to say that they shouldn't have done it, but I think it's all something that we need to be constantly keep in mind and be vigilant about as we're working through these buildings. So here's the statement about how much stuff we're dealing with. Between 1945 and 1980, more was built around the world than had ever been built in the history of mankind. And I think it's probably, I haven't been able to get data to actually substantiate whether my statement there about between, but if you think of all the building that's been going on in Asia and China especially, it's probably true. Certainly the population has doubled since then, so the amount of building is probably. So the fact is, we can't, as the building stock from the 50s and 60s and 70s and even the 80s and 90s begins to age, we can't just throw this stuff away and say, well, now we're going to build high-performance, sustainable buildings, which unfortunately is exactly what the USGBC had been telling us for years. They've kind of pulled back a little, and they recognize more of the value of trying to save and retrofit buildings. But it's not easy, and in many cases, it's a very hard sell. So, these are some of the issues that we're dealing with. I don't need to read those out for you. I think these are things that are sort of self-explanatory, and then the technical challenges that go along with that. And so let's touch on a couple of the particular kind of typological notions that we're dealing with. First is a curtain wall. It's very obvious. Curtain walls are not very sustainable things. They are, as a matter of fact, actually the earlier curtain walls are more easily able to be retrofit than what is built today, because the unitized systems, everything is sealed together, and as soon as a gasket goes, you've got to throw the whole thing out, which is not a good thing at all. But here are a couple of examples of buildings that have been reclad. I'm going to start from right to left. Right is Libra House, which probably all of you know, in New York by Skidmore and Merrill. 1952 it was completed. And around 2000, the curtain wall started failing big time. And what they did was, though, they stripped it off and completely replaced it, but they replaced it with something that looks identical to what was there before. But they were able, because they had enough room, to create a thermally broken system, keeping the sight lines with insulating glass. They made many technical improvements. But here again, you have something which is brand new, which did not exist in the original building. The left and middle are the Celebri building in Cleveland. And that's an interesting case because this is a building owned by the GSA, the General Services Administration. And they did their due diligence, saying, we know this is not an icon. It's kind of an ordinary, everyday modern building. It's a big modern building, but it's not special. So they did an evaluation of significance and determined that they should keep the building, but it was okay to replace the facade. So what you see in the middle slide is, in fact, what it was replaced with. So this is now a high-performance, high-tech, very much more sustainable facade than what is on the left. But because of the fact that they were not bound as much by the aesthetics as you would be with something like Libra House, which is a much greater significance, they were able to play a little bit more fast and loose with the aesthetic. That's part of what the APT modernism principles are saying we're going to have to be able to do more and more. Concrete's concrete's great fun to work with. It's everybody's dream and everybody's nightmare. But patching old concrete is a real challenge. And I show this slide. This is one of the IMP buildings at MIT, the Dreyfus Chemistry Lab. And the patches there are obvious. You can see them. Now this was done scientifically. They had conservators, they had experts all over this thing. And the fact of the matter is, concrete is so unpredictable that it's virtually impossible to ever guarantee a match. You can get the texture right, but the color and the things will vary. Just the fact if the humidity goes up 10% or 15% or the temperature drops, that will change the color of the concrete. It's set ever so slightly, but it will do it. And so it is again, it's an interesting battle. And unfortunately, sometimes people, even in the best of situations, fall prey to the temptation to paint. I don't know why someone has painted this wall in the courtyard at La Tourette, which certainly is one of the concrete buildings. I mean, it's one of the great concrete buildings of all time. There may be something somewhere that says it was okay to paint these particular levels. I don't know. But once you paint concrete, it's something different. It's not the same material anymore. I mean, it doesn't have the same kind of depth or resonance I mean, it's not really a natural material, but it feels in many ways like a natural material. So it's just, again, these are cautionary tales. These are the kinds of things you need to look out for. And I think certainly anybody who's working on a building that involves concrete conservation, get expert help. There are experts out there. It's never going to be perfect, but at least there are people who will guarantee that you will get not only the best appearance, but the most long-lasting technical solutions. There are people who are evolving better and better technical solutions to concrete repair. Concrete can be difficult. Paul Rudolph, in his later life, of course, embraced this corduroy concrete, which is a very interesting material, but not the kind of material you would normally want to put in a place that is designed to house mentally disadvantaged people, which was the case with this building. And it has gained quite a reputation. It was actually used as the site of the FBI headquarters in The Departed. And I think if you look at that picture on the right and imagine a severely mentally disturbed person walking into the building underneath that, it's not a pretty image. Polymers. That's another thing we're dealing with. We're dealing with all kinds of plastics, and in this case, gypsum reinforced polyester. I mean, there's any one of a number of materials out there. Cow wall's another one. But this happens to be a very famous building by a very famous architect, by James Stirling in Haslemere, England, the Olivetti plan. And, what do you do with those panels? I mean, in the end, at some point, they're just going to give out and probably have to be replaced. And do you replace them in kind? Do you replace them with a better synthetic? I don't really know. So, but again, these are things that we're constantly dealing with. And here is, this is actually the cover to a conservation plan I just completed with Quinn Evans Architects for a project that SOM is doing to expand the Wellesley College Science Center. And this, to me, is the last great modern building in New England, the laboratory designed by Perry Dean Rogers and Partners for the Wellesley College Science Center. But all along this one, let's see if that works. Oh, okay. This material here, and up on the penthouse, right there, all of that too, that's all cow wall. And cow wall, according to current fire codes, can only be used on very small areas of the site. It's actually considered a flammable product. The irony is they put cow wall in this building to begin with because their metal panels had flammable polystyrene insulation, and the building department made them change that 45 years ago. So we're back. But here again, we tried mightily to see if there was a way to just restore this. But after there gets to a point, you can only renew it so much, and at some point the fiberglass just decomposes, and you're left with something that you have to replace. And then in the new regulatory environment, that's often a substitute material, which isn't going to look like that. So the appearance of the building will be changed, and there's really no way around that. Talk a little bit about sustainability and resilience and program fit and all the kind of things that sort of go into the consideration of what you do with these buildings. First of all, a couple slides to demonstrate that even way back in the 1940s, that there was more attention paid to energy performance and sustainability than one might think. Sure, oil was relatively cheap, but remember in the immediate post-war era, it was also rationed. So there were some shortages, and there was a desire on the part of architects like Carl Koch in New England and like O'Neill Ford in San Antonio to really look at designing sensitively to site planning. And I live in a house that was designed in 1949 by a local architect outside of Boston. Very, very sensitive to sun angles in terms of how the sun comes in the winter and the summer, how it's sited, where the trees are. So these are not things that we have found anew since the late 60s or 70s. They were wisdom that was there and then perhaps lost and retrieved. But but there is this thread that must be recognized, and even in larger buildings, like this hotel in Panama by Edward Durrell Stone. This building was initially built without air conditioning. And, it was designed for cross ventilation, and again, with good sun shading and that sort of thing. And Stone was very vocal and very proud about it in 1950-52, saying, I've designed this, but this is, whether he used sustainability particularly, I don't know, but certainly something that is environmentally sensitive to the climate of Panama City. And Le Corbusier proposals for the United Nations. He wanted to put brise soleil to shield the west facade, because he had learned the hard way that you have to do that with his Cité de Refuge in Paris, the Salvation Army building, which he designed as a sealed facade with no sun shading and everybody inside cooked. So they had to go back and redo that. So he wasn't going to make that mistake twice. But he also proposed a green roof for the General Assembly. Never executed, but again, these are things to be reminded about, because this is 1947 that this is happening. Now, to come back to the idea about the sustainability or not of the curtain wall just for a minute, there is a study, the image on the left there of this mid-century unmodern, about a huge amount of building stock in New York City, that basically these people are saying, even from a sustainability standpoint, you need to tear this down and rebuild it. That's going to be better than trying to retrofit it. But in the end, it's not because they can't do it. It's not because you can't make these buildings much more sustainable. It's about what constitutes Class A office space. And it's about ceiling heights, it's about column spacing, it's all of these things the paradigms that have changed, standards that have changed since the 50s and 60s. And people who are, because nobody designs buildings with 11-foot floor-to-floors anymore in these kinds of buildings. And that's kind of the way that they were done, with the exception of Washington, D.C., which is what you see there on the right. And what's happening there is buildings are being stripped back to the concrete frame. Usually it's concrete because that gives you the narrowest floors, and then reclad with these unitized systems. And the bone about this is that these unitized systems in 20 or 30 years are going to fail. And you can't just go in and tweak and repair them. They got to be thrown out and redone again. Now, there are people who are starting to work on a retrofittable curtain wall, looking both historically and going forward, so that the idea that you could take a gasket out, you could take a glazing light out without removing the whole system, but still get the performance that a unitized system will give you, is something that is, I'd say, a high priority for the building industry at this point, to really be able to make that work. And I want to give a shout out to the Facade Tectonics group in University of Southern California, who are trying to make some headroad on this issue. Just a little example of a building in Washington that I worked on with EYP some years ago. But it's also, this is a matter about perception. What you see on the upper left there is the original building, designed by Holabird, Root, and Breguet in the late 1950s, with this nice green, really 50s-looking green glass building. Okay, but beautifully built, well built. That's a stainless steel curtain wall system, very robust. So we determined fairly early with the owner that we actually didn't have to completely strip the system off. We could, in this case, because it's a stick-built system, we could just take the glass out, replace it with insulating glass, improve the seals, improve the weeps, and give them a better product. But they fought that, and they fought it not because of the technical issues, they fought it because they want the building to look new. They didn't want it to look the way it looked before. They really wanted a whole new building. So we said, okay, we'll change the glass. So we changed it to this darker blue glass. They were very happy. Made a new entry, which you see there on the lower left, much more sort of contemporary feel coming in. And I think they were, as far as I know, walked away happy. This was quite some time ago. But it's an object lesson of the fact that many building owners really, they feel that they can't market their buildings, or they're not comfortable in them unless they look new and different, and they don't really want to return to a past aesthetic. So that is a mindset that you have to deal with as well. Spend a few minutes on where you have to do, some of the things you have to do to make a building work from a regulatory standpoint in terms of bathrooms, access, dimensions of doors and ramps and all kinds of things. So Paul Rudolph's Art and Architecture Building, Yale, another one of his very brutalist buildings. But the image on the right is the plan, of course, underwent a tremendous restoration, very well thought through, well funded, because Bob Stern was the dean, and he insisted. He said, if I'm going to be dean here, we're going to do this. We're going to do it right. That's the end of it. No cost cutting. So they built on the next slide shows you they built. In order to make this all work, they basically had to take everything from, I think, here over. That's all an addition. Now, they are getting some additional program space, but essentially, the motivation to do that addition was to take care of the elevators, to take care of the fire stairs, to take care of all the stuff that simply wasn't working anymore in Rudolph's building. Because Rudolph loves to design in sections, so there are many levels. It's an accessibility nightmare, and the only way that they were able to sort of bring that all together was to create this fairly substantial addition, which was done by Guathmy, with Hoffman Architects doing the restoration, and AIAETN doing all the sustainability checks. So there you see, on the left is the photo from the rear. You can pretty much tell what's Rudolph's and what's the new building. And then on the right, again, the addition off to the right. Very controversial to build the addition. I mean, they had a tremendous wealth of architectural talent focused on this thing. A lot of people kind of scratched their heads as to what they came up with. But from the point of view of enabling the restoration of spaces like this and other things within the old Rudolph building, it did its job. But it's not something that everybody can do. It's a very expensive, time-consuming, exacting process that probably is only really worth doing on buildings of this kind of level of significance. And again, as I mentioned, AIAETN was very involved from a sustainability standpoint, and in that it is a model project of what one can do with a modern building. There's a whole lecture that goes with that. I'm just sort of making you aware that it's out there because they did a lot of things to really maximize the potential of what was in this building through very careful analysis, strategic use of sun shading, what they did with the mechanical systems, airflow, all kinds of things. Very exemplary project. Sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes no matter what you do and how hard you argue, a building with the significance of a building like Bertram Goldberg's Prentice Women's Hospital in Chicago, it's just the land is too valuable, and frankly, the use was too locked in. I mean, this is you see, it's a sort of cloverleaf-shaped building with radial rooms inside, and everything's done in reinforced concrete. What do you do? So to rehabilitate that would certainly be a Herculean effort, and Northwestern University had absolutely no patience to consider that, and they wanted to build a much bigger building on here. I actually thought that Gene Gang, I couldn't find an image of it, but Gene Gang did a brilliant scheme that actually plopped the tower right on top of this thing, about that big, but it was in the end proved to be fruitless. They went ahead. So we do lose these. We've lost the Paul Rudolph Government Center in Goshen, New York, to a very insensitive addition and renovation. We've completely lost the Third Church by I.M. Pei near the White House in Washington. There are many examples of these. So, a little bit of design and Secretary of the Interior standards. I want to look a little bit at just the whole idea of language and compatibility and how one sort of fits things together here. And so, the idea is, of course, it's supposed to be differentiated. It's supposed to be harmonious, compatible, but different. And so there are many different ways one can do this. And one I think that was particularly well done was by my former partner, Paul King, at Trinity University in San Antonio in Texas, where we did a new science center for them. And we really created a new place. And we used buildings by O'Neill Ford, the original campus architect, who did basically the whole campus in the 40s and 50s. Such as the building you see going off to your right and in the background there, as a kind of a framework for these new interventions, which are done with sensitivity to the material palette, proportioning systems, and a lot of other things of O'Neill Ford, but at the same time, making a very contemporary statement. So I think this is a good, harmonious sort of evolutionary fit, a good way to put a contemporary addition on a modern campus. A building with a slightly more robust program, and it was a little bit more down and dirty building. This is one of the big GE buildings from the 1930s in Schenectady, New York, that they used for R&D. And they wanted to turn this into their sort of headquarters of their sustainability unit for solar and wind power. And so what EYP did was they sort of glazed in. They took this end down basically, and I don't know how well you can see it, but this is a huge glazed atrium with a wind turbine standing inside of it. So it's the idea, and of course, and then dropped a very high performance skin over that existing skin to make it a very sustainable, very high performance building. That's a very straightforward thing, but that GE has reaped great benefit from this, not only from a use standpoint, but from a PR standpoint as well. A very iconic building in my town, in Boston, is Jose Luis Sirt's Law Tower, Law School, which is in some ways the most Corbusian. It's the Corbusian skyscraper that Le Corbusier was never able to build himself. It was very much like the building he designed for Algiers in the 1930s. But this was a building that also was a functional nightmare because the classrooms were all on the top. The elevators were very slow, so every time classes changed, students would spend 15, 20 minutes yelling and screaming trying to get in and out of class because it simply didn't work. So what BU decided to do was to build an addition, which you see here, as opposed to nothing there, to move the classrooms down to large plate floors and to just put faculty offices up above. But it's a good object lesson in, again, taking a contemporary and very rough, brutalist, difficult building, a building with all kinds of technical problems. And Brunner Kott, who were the renovation architects, how they did the addition here in the back, and then glazing in this lobby, which had just been open space, to be able to create a meeting space. A lot of what's involved with this is just sort of, you may remember one of the points I had up there was sort of a better human scale, sort of meeting the ground in a way that's more comfortable for the people using the building, that makes it more friendly, more welcoming, warmer, something. These buildings this was not the strong point of the buildings especially from the 60s and 70s. Richard's laboratory, Louis Kahn. It was, Richard's Labs was the first and only commission that Kahn did for the University of Pennsylvania, and it was a very interesting project. It was a bit tragic for him. In the end, at the very end, he got fired while they were doing the Goddard Labs, which is sort of the extension on. But it was Kahn at the height of his interest in structure. The first time he worked with August Commandant, and it's very much about the idea of expressions of structure and mechanical systems and how these things impact a building, impact the way a building is built, experienced, and used. And so you can see it in looking at the plan. It is it's also the most eloquent expression in any building that he did, I think, of servant and served spaces. So here is the servant, the C tower, which is solid, and here are the three laboratory towers, which are these blocks right here. And these big snorkels, as Kahn called them, are the towers that come off the end of those. These are the Goddard Labs. They're not part of the story today, so that's for another day. But I think to read this, Kahn thought scientists worked like architects and wanted to just make big open floors. And those laboratory floors, those trays, work beautifully that way. The problem is it's not how they work. They need to build walls. They need to compartmentalize and create these little cellular spaces. So that was the sort of the tragic conundrum of this. That is in Vincent Scully's quote down there at the end. Function not perfectly at all. And nobody was a bigger booster of Louis Kahn than Vincent Scully. So if even Scully is saying this, you realize there's some problems. So that informs the problem. So I'll quickly go through these, just show you some studies how much he was really fascinated by the idea of how you express it. Those are duct shafts. That's all they are. And the idea that there's more air coming at every floor. And then here, these many articulations of the Vierendeel trusses getting thinner and thinner as they come off of the cantilevered columns here. So there's a very, very literal and very almost childlike, passionate investigation of this stuff in the early stages of the Richards building. And here that is in plan. You see that even early in schematics, he's already doing his duct and pipe layouts to see how that's all going to work off of these individual tray floors. So what you have here then, as the building comes together, is a system of poured-in-place concrete columns, precast Virandil frames, which are these things, coming together in an ideal, which is this 9-square grid with a 4-square grid inside. It got VE down from 9 and 9 to 4 and 9, which is really a much more elegant solution. But then here's the architecture. Here you can see where all of these partitions are dividing up these floors. And Kahn just kind of did. He didn't want to know about that. It had to be there, but it was foreshadowing being very problematic. So here you see the building being built. A couple of photos in construction. Very profound, literal expression of how the structure works in this building, and then how the systems were laid out. You have here the design principles, which are very clearly stated in the working drawings about where you put each system. It's all called out here. It's all layered and leveled. And interestingly enough, when they started building this, there had been a change in the drawings, and the contractor started laying this out, and Kahn came and said, you have it all wrong. He actually made them tear out all the existing ductwork and do it again because it didn't meet his standards. And I think that was probably the beginning of some trouble with the University of Pennsylvania. But in any case, what you see here, this is really the ideal. This is so you have the structure, you have the systems beautifully layered, and you have this open sort of universal concept. It's the closest thing Kahn comes to an idea of universal space, because Louis Kahn really is about rooms, not about space. But with the open corners, I think here he's pushing that envelope in a way that he never did in his subsequent work. And there you see this beautiful diagram from Thomas Leslie's Building Art, Building Science, about how that all goes together. So in the end, this is the building kind of in its purest form. This is after the basic construction is complete, but before all the partitions go in. And it's really these series of lovely stacked vitrines. And you can stand in the corner and look off to the people in across the way in the other corner. You could do that even after the work was finished. But it's very much this idea about individuality and community of the same thing, which the greatest architects of the 20th century were all very obsessed with. I think Alvar Aalto did that, Kahn did that. They were people who really understood that balance between the space for the individual and the idea of the larger community space. So here again, this is getting to what we had to work with. The design principles, if you are going to put partitions in there, is you respect the structural grid. And there you can see the diagram there and the actual plan. And also sort of the obsessive compulsive detailing, the idea that, for instance, because he wanted the doors and all of the opening lines to exactly align, he took the heads off the doors. So what you have here is you have a jamb and then just the concrete going across, and the door just comes up so that you have a nice, clean, continuous line. It just gives you an idea as to how careful he was being about everything here. So here again, the ideal and the real. The Museum of Modern Art had a show for a single building, single person show just about the Richards Labs, which ironically they had just before it opened. So people weren't really kind of clued in yet to what the troubles were going to be. And then on the right, the sort of reality of what we were facing when we took over the project and started working on it in 2011, 2012. So these are the programming and technical building challenges, and in the interest of time, I'll just let you sort of scan those over, and we'll go right into some of the work here. So these are the project drivers. We turned it from a wet lab, in short noted, into a Center for Cognitive Neuroscience. So we basically took all of the fume hoods out, all of the wet bench out. It's all computational at this point. So that made our job a lot easier. And I think this is a case where a change in use and adaptive use was important really to save the building. And then make the building function better. That's really what we were after here. So we sat down and we began, first of all, we did our design guidelines, our preservation guidelines, our sort of little conservation management plan, determine levels of significance, and it's important here to note that the most significant space actually is right here, in the sense of what cannot change. Because what you have in the rest of the public space here, and in the labs, which are the tertiary, you would think they would be the most important part. They are on the outside. But on the inside, because they were all cut up into these little rabbit warrens, there was nothing of significance in that. So we said, there are principles to be respected, there are guidelines you're going to have to follow, but it's not going to be the reconstruction of what was there. So there you see the original 6th floor plan and what our design did, and I will talk. And I will talk about the evolution of how this came about. So first of all, you have the reprogramming of the interior spaces in the C tower. I won't go into that. And then you have the offices in the D tower. And very important here for the offices is that we had to find a way to make these egalitarian. There used to be that an office would go like that, which would give you a big corner office and a little inside office. Penn wouldn't allow it. They said, you have to find a way to make these egalitarian, the same. So we looked at the grid and we said, all right, what we have to do then is find a way to offset, to actually set off from the grid. And we found a precedent, both in this building and in other works of Kahn, for how he does that. How he says, okay, well, I've got these very strongly articulated grids, but sometimes you got to move things, so here's a way to do it. So we took that as our clue as we designed a way in which to manage these offsets. And then, so that's the idea of the right sizing, because that's what the office size used to be. And then also very important was to honor the original idea of the open floor by always leaving one corner open. So what we were also able to do in democratizing these sizes here is create a wide enough zone in the center to put in these workstations. So that now you can set up a whole bunch of graduate student workstations here. You put another cohort in the corner. It's open, and you really get a sense with the glazing of these partitions and all that you've got a very nice, manageable open space. So that's, and then the testing rooms and the reduction. So I'm going to take you very quickly through what we did with the glazing. This building here is on the left is the American Federation of Labor Medical Services building. It doesn't exist anymore. It was built just before Richards in Philadelphia. And I show it because it's the first time Kahn used a system for the windows of a custom-formed brake metal and stainless steel. Kahn didn't like the windows that were out there. He didn't like steel windows. He didn't like the aluminum windows. He tried them both. He was not happy with them, and he began to develop his own bespoke system, which he used all the way from this building to the end of his career, right up through the Yale Center for British Art in the 1970s. So just to look at some of the issues we were dealing with, obviously there's the issue of solar gain. They had these cool shades which were taken off at some point in the distant past and never functioned very well. We also had movement in the building. If you sight down that corner, you'll see that the corners are tipped out, the bricks move, things, and so that we're not dealing with sort of perfectly planar elements. And then here again, other examples of the shading. Kahn's original glazing details for you see this is a very big window that's almost 15 feet wide by 5.5 feet high. So these are substantial pieces of glass, and they were 1/4-inch polished plate, which means they kind of did this in the wind. And there you see, there's that very elegant brake metal section, very minimal, nothing to it. And this wonderful corner detail with the cruciform column, which he never replicated anywhere else. So our challenge was to say, what can we do to save this? Because there was no way that we were going to take that framing system out. Not only is it part of the history and aesthetic of the building, but it also would have ruined the concrete and brick into which it was set. You'd have to destroy all that to take it out. So we had to find a way to try to make this work as best as possible. And I noodled about this quite a lot. This is just one of my noodling sketches to try to see, is there a way that we could use to change this to make it thermally broken and with an IGU. And we were a little more scientific here and tried looking at this and really determined that it wasn't worth it. It is not only from a payback standpoint, the building would never really look right, and if you really looked at the overall energy performance and the idea that we were tightening this thing up enough by just going back with what we ended up with, is a laminated glass, right, which you see here. That was the ultimate solution. So here's the original. Here it is without the thermal break, but with an IGU, with a stop which may or may not have actually worked. And then here with a laminated glass. So we tried to get as high performance a glass as we could while maintaining the color balance, because that was obviously very important that it still looked clear. But we were able to use the interlayer and the surfaces of the inside to put in a high performance coating and to hopefully create something that reads very flat, because the other problem with an IGU is that on a piece of glass that size, you get this warpage because of the difference in pressure between the inside and the outside. You don't have that problem with an IGU. With tempered glass, you have roller wave, and you also have the problem of exposing the coating either on the inside or the outside. So lamination is a good solution. Hopefully it will last a very long time. Vinyl doesn't last forever. We can't guarantee exactly how long that will go, but it certainly should be at least for, let's hope 50 years or more in any case. So that was our solution. And we also, at the same time, were working with the systems to work through, again, the layering, honoring con system, but now putting in chilled beams. Instead of a VAV system, in tightening up the envelope, we were able to improve the performance of the envelope sufficiently to enable chilled beams, and that's where we get the big energy reduction. So we were able to create the energy frugal system that Penn was looking for. And here you see this is some of our Navisworks coordination drawings, and that little diagram on the left there is the detail that we found for some back of house areas for how to do the offset in the ceiling, to be able to create that offset to move the partitions off the grid. This is the analysis of where we ended up. And it's this one. So it's not perfect, but there's your baseline. That's what we started. That was the best we could have possibly done, which would have ruined the building from an aesthetic point of view. So we're about 80% of that, and everybody felt that was good enough. And it's important to note too that one of the drivers for this project and funding for this project came from a Century Bond initiative, which is directly tied to sustainability improvements. So these are the kind of adaptive solutions that we did. There's a photo up there of us checking a mock-up of the glass. There's a finished corner office with the offset partition. And then, just to remind ourselves, we look very hard at Kahn's own work to come up with a language for the material palette for what we were going to put back in, because we were making a change, and this was invented, it was designed, what we tried to do is be evolutionary, not to mimic Kahn per se, but to adapt a solution in a way that was sympathetic to what he had done and what he had shown. So the palette of the exposed concrete, and steel and oak, and then the offset here also at Kimball. The idea that by offsetting a partition here and offsetting a partition here, he's creating enough space within the realm of the structural grid to fit a room. So it's an idea of how one breaks the rules in ways that are creative. So this is a typical view of that corner. The idea of basically insetting a piece of glass inside the big light in order to get borrowed light across there. And then here, the actual panels of the offsets and a space now big enough to accommodate workstations. The concrete was cleaned. We just gave it 2 coats of simple green. We decided not to do anything special, even though it was pretty mucked up in places. And frankly, that was enough just to make it glow. I mean, and what I said before about concrete feeling in some ways like an organic material is very true in this building. There's a warmth to it that actually is part of the patina, because as concrete carbonates, it does go from a gray more and more and more towards a beige color. It warms up in color over the years, and that is quite evident in the quality of this building. We discovered a detail also that Kahn had developed for a shroud to sort of partially conceal systems up above, and in pushing this wall back, the original wall in this corridor stopped right here. We took the storage closet out, pushed it back to the original concrete wall, and created these lounge spaces, and then used that idea of the shroud to be able to drop, to both clean this up a little bit and as an opportunity to put in some lights there to illuminate the space. So again, this is kind of a found space improvement over what had been there before. Very minimal renovations to the lobby down below, but you see some of what we're dealing with in terms of systems coordination up here. You can't keep clear of the windows all the time. And then there is the image with the steel case furniture, which we're very pleased to have. And I'll end it with that. You can read through this, and if there is time, I'm very happy to take questions. Anyone? Yeah.
You mentioned Dulles earlier, and it had achieved a historic status much sooner than 50 years.
Yes.
Is there a process for that?
Yes. There is. No. There is within the Secretary of the Interior standards, there is, I believe it's Section G, if I'm not mistaken, which is the argument for exceptional significance. If you can make an argument to the Department of the Interior that your building has exceptional significance and should therefore be listed early, they will hear that. Yeah. No one else? Sorry to keep you so long.